Act 1. The incident. If I can't have them, no one will. That chilling thought didn't just belong to a jealous ex or a scorned lover. It belonged to a father of 17. A man who had built a life not around love, not around duty, but around manipulation, welfare fraud, and absolute control. On May 11, 2012, flames tore through a quiet suburban home in Derby, England. The fire consumed everything in its path: furniture, memories, and worst of all, 6 innocent children. At first glance, it looked like a tragic accident, a freak electrical fire, a misstep with a cigarette. But as investigators combed through the ashes, what they uncovered was not just horrifying, it was calculated. This wasn't an accident. This was arson. And the culprit wasn't a stranger. It was the father, Mick Philpott, the man who called himself their protector. Act 2. Timeline of discovery. The emergency call came in at 3:46 a.m. Neighbors were the first to notice the fire consuming the terraced house on Victory Road. 6 children were inside: Jade, 10, John, 9, Jack, 7, Jesse, 6, Jaden, 5, and Dwayne, 13. Firefighters rushed in, battling the flames to reach the sleeping children. But the heat was too intense. By the time they were pulled out, 5 were already gone. Dwayne would die 2 days later in the hospital. Mick Philpott and his wife Mairead stood outside sobbing, clutching each other, surrounded by cameras and microphones. They held a press conference. Mick wept. "I can't believe they're gone," he said. "They were our life." The public cried with him. Donations poured in. A community mourned. But investigators didn't buy it. The fire's origin was suspicious, traced to the letterbox, with clear signs of petrol. And Mick's behavior? Even stranger. Laughing in the mortuary, flirting with officers, relishing the media spotlight. Then came the forensics. A discarded petrol can, gloves, traces of gasoline on Mick's clothes. Police wired his hotel room. They didn't have to wait long. Mick was overheard coaching his wife. "You sticking to the story? I didn't mean to do it. On my life." The timeline unraveled fast, and with it, the illusion of a grieving father. Act 3. The victims and their life. 6 children, each with dreams never realized. Jade, the eldest daughter, only 10 years old. Bright, loving, and already showing signs of a leader. 9-year-old John was thoughtful and responsible, often looking out for his younger sibling. Jack, 7, loved toy soldiers and made up epic battle stories. Jesse, 6, was the joker of the family, always dancing, always smiling. Jaden, just 5, still clung to his blanket at night. And Dwayne, 13, the eldest son, a quiet protector who once told a teacher, "I'm not scared of anything, unless it's my dad." They lived in a house of chaos, not because they were bad children, but because they had a father who saw them as financial assets. Mick Philpott didn't raise children. He collected them. Each child brought more benefit money, more government aid, more control. The home wasn't one of joy. It was a battlefield of manipulation, jealousy, and fear. Multiple women lived under his rule, rotating nights in a garden caravan, submitting to his commands. This wasn't a family. It was a cult of one man's ego, and 6 of his children would ultimately pay the price for it. Act 4. Crime scene breakdown, Victory Road. A quiet residential street, shattered by smoke, sirens, and disbelief. Inside the charred remains of house number 18, the stench of melted plastic, petrol, and death lingered. Investigators immediately ruled out natural causes. The origin point? The letterbox. A pool of gasoline had been poured through the mail slot and ignited, creating an instant backdraft. The fire swept up the staircase like a vengeful tide, trapping all 6 children in their bedrooms. Temperatures upstairs reached over 500 degrees Celsius, enough to scorch lungs before flames ever touched skin. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no intruder footprints. This fire came from within. Detectives found a petrol can and gloves discarded nearby. Both had traces of Mick Philpott's DNA. A ladder, meant for the rescue, sat unused in the backyard. But what turned investigators' suspicions into certainty were the strange behaviors after the fire. Mick joked at the mortuary. He laughed with reporters. He even put a police officer in a headlock during a visit to the morgue. and in a press conference meant to honor his dead children, he flirted with a female officer and invited her to his hotel room. Something was deeply wrong, and they were about to prove it. Act 5. Suspicion and Lies. At first, police looked at Lisa Willis, Mick's ex-partner and the mother of 5 of the children. She had left Mick just months before the fire, escaping a volatile household and starting a custody battle over her kids. To the outside world, it made sense. A bitter ex, a custody dispute. But forensic timelines and alibis quickly cleared her. All eyes turned to Mick, and then they bugged his hotel room. What they captured was beyond incriminating. In a private conversation, Mick asked Mairead, "You're sticking with the story, right?" "I didn't mean to do it, on my life." He confessed it was his fault they lost everything. He even praised Mairead for sleeping with their co-conspirator, Paul Mosley, to keep him loyal. In another chilling moment, Mick watched his wife perform a sexual act on Mosley in their hotel room, days after their children died. When questioned, Mosley confirmed it, said Mick had orchestrated the encounter, said Mick bragged about the fire, even joked about getting away with it. These weren't grieving parents. They were actors. And the mask was crumbling fast. Act 6. The Turning Point. On May 28, 2012, 17 days after the fire, Mick and Mairead Philpott were arrested on suspicion of murder. Days later, Paul Mosley joined them. In court, prosecutors unveiled the full horror. This wasn't just arson. It was a calculated plot to frame Lisa Willis, gain custody of her children, and collect more benefit money from the government. The fire was meant to be heroic theater. Mick planned to rescue the kids, then emerge a grieving father wronged by an evil ex. But the plan failed catastrophically. Instead of waking the children and rescuing them, the fire consumed them all. When questioned, Mick insisted the deaths were accidental. He didn't mean for anyone to die. But the petrol on his clothes told another story. So did the hidden recording of him confessing. So did the lies. So did the lust. So did the latter, untouched, left behind like a tombstone. The court reduced the charge from murder to manslaughter, not because the act was any less monstrous, but because they couldn't prove he intended to kill. The motive was crystal clear. Custody, welfare payments, a bigger house. 6 lives traded for selfishness. Act 7. Psychology and Motive. Mick Philpott wasn't just a man with a dark plan. He was a man with a deep void, a narcissist obsessed with control, power, and praise. His entire life revolved around manipulation. Control over women, control over children, control over public sympathy. He lived in a council house with 2 partners, 11 children, and a media persona as the ultimate dad. He once appeared on television boasting about his £60,000 a year benefit income. He demanded a bigger house from the state to fit his expanding family. He portrayed himself as a victim of an unjust system. But behind the mask was a man who beat his partners, dictated their every move, and treated women like currency. The fire wasn't born from rage. It was strategy, twisted strategy. Mick feared Lisa Willis's independence. She was leaving him, taking the kids. So he tried to destroy her, not just emotionally but legally. He plotted a fire that would paint her as a child killer while he'd emerge the tragic father. But it backfired, badly. When his kids actually died, Mick didn't collapse in grief. He posed for cameras. He cracked jokes in court. He accused everyone else. Forensic psychologist Dr. Julian Boone described Mick as a textbook coercive controller, a man who needed everyone orbiting him or else. His children weren't people, they were props, and when he lost control, he burned them all. Act 8. Aftermath and Emotional Echo. The trial ended with national outrage. Mick Philpott was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 15 years. Mairead received 17 years. Paul Mosley, 17 years. None of them showed remorse. But the real victims were never in the dock. They were Dwayne, 13, Jade, 10, John, 9, Jack, 8, Jesse, 6, and Jaden, 5. 6 young lives, stolen in their sleep. They never knew their father's plan. They never got to grow up, to leave, to live. The case sparked a firestorm in British politics and media. Some used it to attack the welfare system, others to shine a light on domestic abuse and coercive control. But at its core, this wasn't about benefits or broken policies. It was about a man who believed he owned his family and would rather see them dead than free. In the years that followed, vigils were held on Victory Road. The charred remains of House 18 were demolished, but the shadow never left. Not for the community, not for the nation, and certainly not for the surviving children Mick had from other relationships. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a crime of possession. And the lesson? Sometimes the monsters aren't strangers. They're the ones who smile in family photos and sleep across the hall. If you believe more people need to hear disturbing truths like this, hit that like button. If your heart broke for those 6 innocent children, leave a comment below. And if you want to see more stories that expose the darkest corners of humanity, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this wasn't just a crime, it was a warning.